Time 4:32 a.m. December 1st, Monday. The reason I'm making this recording is simply to just kind of get on recording some information about a dream that I'd had. You know, dreams, part dream, part inspiration, what have you. Well, I invented a drug that helped, I don't know if help is the right word, could just say precipitated the phenomenon that where they remember and perceive things just as they really are, just as they are. There really is no two ways about it. When something happens, it does happen just as it really is. The issue is that humans put a lot of other narrative gloss around it as they remember it and embrace it. And so what the effect of this drug is that it is just seen for what it is, remembered just the way it is. So it's interesting effect of this drug is that it can cause high stress. And the reason for that is that ordinarily we want to put our narrative gloss over things because of, our various other filters that cause us to want to be in the place of right or wrong in the way we've interpreted it, right or wrong in the narrative that it suggests about us, what have you, mistakes that are made, they can be minor, what have you, but a lot of humans don't necessarily like to admit to their mistakes, right? And so we put a lot of narrative gloss over stuff, and we remember things just a little bit differently because maybe it's more comfortable, less anxiety provoking to remember it one way or another, whatever, more fun, more whatever. We will often put a narrative gloss on it because even the immediate event and the way we're experiencing it can suggest that other things that we've done in our lives or remembered or positions that we've taken can be right or wrong or shameful or what have you. So this is a kind of an interesting drug, and I don't have a name for it. It's something that humans could do anyway. I've quite often talked about the ability for myself to a certain degree and other people to be able to just sort of strip off bias and see things the way they really are. Usually happens in science, usually happens with things that don't necessarily have personal implication for an individual, because it's easiest to do that. But in this case, this drug, it would do this for everything, okay? And so while it is technically possible for an individual to see things or experience things that way, normally we don't, and I'm not quite sure what this drug was doing, but it was enabling for a moment. It's probably extreme to say it this way, but let's just say that for a moment it was not possible for a human to paint a narrative over what they were seeing or thinking about or remembering. Okay, all the narrative gloss was stripped off, kind of like a solvent or whatever, Anyway, as the drug would wear off, then the tendency to re-gloss things, would come back. Now, why this has importance is it harkens back to the notion of original sin, which is an extraordinarily misunderstood item by a lot of people. There's the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and the original sin, and it's pretty clear, at least in the translations of the Bible, that what that was about was the two humans, Eve first, then Adam, eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It wasn't that the original sin was not that they had disobeyed the Lord and eaten from some tree. or eaten an apple, and an apple had been forbidden for some reason. We're given that narrative. But rather specifically, it was a specific tree that we were told not to eat from, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And I have no idea what that fruit was, and I'm sure it was an allegory. Don't eat, don't consume, basically don't consider things from the position of good and evil. And you can imagine within the context of this narrative stripping drug, okay, essentially why eating from the tree of knowledge and good and evil was a bad thing for us is, we are given to having the filters that we do have. And maybe the filters facilitate eating from this tree of knowledge of good and evil, but the basic thing is that as humans we want to be on the good side of things. Either we want to be right and not wrong, or we want to be in harmony and not in disharmony, or we want to be, to the extent that there's a God or an imagined God, or, whatever it is that, in our religious filter we're relating with, we want to be on the good side of that, not the bad. And so it is that filter, wanting to do that, and then all of a sudden when you're eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you're now considering things, see, in that light. Was this a good thing I did, a bad thing I did, a good thing I saw, a bad thing I saw? And thinking about the narrative that we paint over our memories of things and our rationalizations for things, and etc., you can imagine that eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil results in the end in a distortion of the way we remember things, a bias, okay? It results in a bias because you're wanting to be on the good side of something. You're not wanting the shame of being on the bad side of something. And so to avoid it or finesse it or what have you, we begin to paint a narrative over things. So this was the original sin that is talked about in the Bible. And of course, it's not taught that way. It's probably not taught that way from people who have been eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and so they, for whatever reason, think about things a little differently. Anyway, so that's the insight, this whole knowledge of a drug that strips the narrative that we place on things, that is usually a narrative trying to accommodate our notion of right, wrong, good, evil, whether we have been right or wrong, not necessarily whether we've been right or wrong, but the narrative that helps us to grapple with the mental issues of wanting to perceive what we're doing as right or wrong, okay? And then we paint narrative to help us feel like we're in that spot. And it does become kind of a self-fulfilling isn't the right word, but it keeps on going and going and going and going, because everything does, of course, have an implication on the thing that we've done before, just by virtue of the fact that a lot of our lives are a repeat in the abstract of things that we've done before. And so, once we've taken a certain position, we kind of keep retaking that position or remembering that position a certain way or what have you. A drug that strips our need, that's probably the better way to say it, strips our need to paint a narrative or a bias over what we do and what we remember and what we see and what we interpret, so that we feel that we are on the right side of the interpretation. That bias distorts, and this drug sort of takes that bias painting urge away, so that we just see things the way we are. The end result of it is it does cause a significant amount of stress, because we do begin to understand that there are certain situations where we've been incorrect or correct or right or wrong or whatever you want to call it, moral and not moral, about various certain things. Whether we have the courage to be on the correct side of certain things, I guess, is an issue. It causes us to continually paint our bias the way we do so that we feel good about ourselves. Because this one is probably fairly important in terms of understanding human nature, why we do what we do and behave the way we do.